The wind was dry, carrying sand across the outpost gates when the alien woman appeared. Her steps were slow, uneven, as if every movement cost her the last of her strength. She carried a child in her thin arms, a child whose head hung weakly against her chest. Dust clung to her face, her clothes were torn, and her lips cracked from thirst. When she reached the human guards at the gate, she could barely stand. Her knees trembled, and then she fell onto the hard ground. The guards lifted their weapons, startled by her sudden collapse, but then froze when she raised her head. Her eyes were wide, glowing faintly in the alien way, yet filled with despair. Her voice broke into the silence, not strong, not proud, only desperate. "Please, may I have the leftovers for my child?" The soldiers looked at one another. Her words were simple, but they carried weight heavier than steel. A request for leftovers, scraps, anything that could keep her child alive. The little one stirred in her arms, his small hand reaching out, shaking as if even lifting it drained him. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Some turned away, pretending not to hear, as if ignoring her would make her vanish. Others whispered, their voices sharp with suspicion. "She could be a spy. She's trying to get inside. If we feed one, hundreds will follow." The alien mother heard them, but she did not argue. Her lips trembled, her eyes filled with tears, yet she only bowed her head lower, holding her child tighter. She was too weak for pride, too tired for anger. She had walked 3 days without food, 3 days of hiding in the wastes, fleeing hunters who would have sold her child like cattle. Now, before her stood humans, the ones said to be both cruel and kind, feared and respected. She did not know which face she would see today. Inside the outpost walls, more soldiers gathered. Their boots echoed as they formed a half circle, watching her. The sun was burning above, the dust swirling, and still she stayed on her knees, her child's shallow breaths the only sound beside the wind. A captain stepped forward, his voice cold. "We are not here to feed beggars," he said. "Take her away." His hand moved to signal the guards, and the woman's heart stopped for a moment. She thought they would drag her back into the wastes, back into the death she had barely escaped. But then a soldier stepped out of the line. His name was Marcus, though the alien mother did not know it. His armor was scratched from many battles, his rifle slung at his side, his jaw set like stone. He had seen many things in war, but none struck him like the sight before him. A mother, broken but unyielding, asking not for herself, but for her child. He remembered nights when he had gone hungry as a boy, his own mother giving him her portion so he would live. That memory burned in his mind as he looked at the trembling child in her arms. Marcus bent down slowly. The other soldiers stiffened, their eyes wide, knowing what it meant if he disobeyed orders. His shadow fell across the alien woman as he knelt before her. She looked up, confused, afraid, unsure if he meant to strike her. Instead, he unclipped a ration pack from his belt and set it on the ground in front of her. The smell of food reached the child, who tried to lift his head. The mother's lips parted in shock, her eyes brimming with tears again, but this time they were different. Tears of disbelief, of sudden hope. Gasps spread through the watching soldiers. Feeding an alien, especially one outside orders, was forbidden. Rumors said such acts were treason, punishable by exile or death. The captain's face darkened with fury. He opened his mouth to shout, but Marcus's eyes locked on his, firm and unyielding. It was a silent defiance, a message that said, "Do what you will, but I will not stand by." The woman hesitated, her thin fingers trembling as they reached for the pack. She tore it open clumsily, her hands weak, and placed the food in her child's hands. The boy's eyes flickered open, glazed with hunger, but when the first bite touched his lips, life sparked back. His small mouth chewed slowly, then faster, as if every piece was a treasure. The mother watched him, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She pressed her forehead to Marcus's armored knee without words, her gratitude too deep to speak. The silence around them was heavy, broken only by the faint sound of the child eating. The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Some glared at Marcus with hatred, others with shame. A few felt their own hearts stir, though they said nothing. To help an alien was to break the law, but to refuse was to deny the very thing that made them human. Marcus stood again, taller than before. He did not speak. He simply turned, facing the outpost wall, as if daring anyone to stop him. His hand rested near his rifle, not as a threat, but as a promise that his choice was final. The alien mother stayed on her knees, clutching her child close, whispering soft words of comfort. In that moment, something changed. Not in the law, not in the command, but in the eyes of those who saw it. A single act of defiance had split the silence wide open, and though no one dared admit it aloud, they all knew this choice would not be forgotten. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching across the camp. The mother held her child as he finally slept, his face peaceful for the first time in days. She raised her eyes once more to Marcus, her lips moving without sound, but he understood. Gratitude, respect, and the fragile bond of trust now tied them together. Around them, the soldiers murmured, uncertain of what would come next. But the feeling hung in the air like a storm about to break. This was only the beginning. Marcus did not sleep that night. He sat near the dim lights of the outpost walls, his rifle across his knees, his mind heavy with the weight of what he had done. The faces of the other soldiers still lingered in his thoughts. Shock, anger, and even fear. To give food to an alien was more than kindness. It was rebellion. He knew it. They all knew it. If reported, command would judge him harshly. Some of the men had already whispered the word traitor under their breath. Yet he could not regret his choice. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the small alien child trying to chew with weak, trembling lips, and the relief in the mother's eyes when life returned to her child's face. That was enough for him, even if the cost was his career, maybe his life. The camp was restless. Rumors moved like fire in dry grass. Soldiers sat in groups, some speaking in low voices, others watching Marcus from afar. A few spat when he walked by, but some stayed quiet, their eyes showing questions they dared not voice. Even among them, the act had planted a seed of doubt. Was it truly treason to save a starving child? Or was it the only human thing left in a war that had stripped away too much? The alien woman had been taken to the medical tent after she fainted from exhaustion. Marcus visited her there when the guards were not watching. She lay on a thin cot, her breathing shallow, but her child rested beside her with a full belly and a weak smile. When she opened her eyes and saw Marcus, she tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. She whispered something in her own language, words he did not understand, but the way her eyes shone told him the meaning well enough. Gratitude, a vow that she would never forget him. But her expression also carried fear. She looked toward the walls of the tent, then back at Marcus, her lips trembling. Finally, she spoke in broken human words, slow and heavy. They will come for us. Marcus frowned. Who? He asked. She shook her head, clutching her child tighter. Hunters, slavers, they come. Her voice cracked, and then she fell silent, her strength gone. Marcus stood still for a long time, her warning echoing in his head. He knew slavers roamed the wastelands. He had seen them before. Merciless raiders who captured refugees and sold them in markets across the stars. If she had escaped them, then she was marked. If they tracked her here, they would not stop until they had her back. And if they came to the outpost, they would not hesitate to slaughter anyone in their way. When Marcus left the tent, he found himself face to face with the captain. The man's eyes burned with fury, his voice low and sharp. Do you think you are a hero? You have disobeyed direct orders. You have shamed this unit. Tomorrow I will make my report, and when it reaches high command, they will deal with you. Marcus stood firm, his jaw tight. I did what was right. The captain's lips curled. Right? You endangered us all for the sake of a beggar alien. Remember this, when punishment comes, no one will stand beside you. The words stung, but Marcus felt no regret. He saluted coldly, turned, and walked away. Behind him, whispers grew louder. Some soldiers already looked at him as if he were a dead man walking. Yet, in the shadows, a few pairs of eyes followed him with something else. Uncertainty, even respect. Later, Marcus found himself outside again, staring at the night sky filled with stars. The alien mother's words echoed in his mind. Hunters, slavers, they would come. He thought of the camp, of the officers who cared only for orders, not for people. If an attack came, would they hand her over? He already knew the answer. They would give her away to save themselves, and no one would remember her plea, her child, her suffering. As the night grew deeper, the child awoke and wandered outside, searching for water. Marcus spotted him, weak and unsteady, nearly falling with every step. He rushed to him, kneeling down. The boy looked up with wide, tired eyes and whispered something small, almost broken. Marcus did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was trust. The boy leaned against him, too weak to walk alone. Marcus carried him back to the tent, laying him beside his mother. The woman stirred, her eyes wet again, but she managed a faint smile. By dawn, the story had spread through every corner of the outpost. Some soldiers avoided Marcus entirely, afraid to be connected to him. Others confronted him directly. "Why should we risk our lives for an alien?" one spat. Marcus stared at him calmly. "Because a child should not starve." The man sneered, shaking his head, but his voice held less strength than before. The simple words had struck deeper than he expected. When breakfast was served that morning, Marcus sat alone. Yet he noticed small things. A young recruit quietly left half his portion near the medical tent. Another soldier, who had once cursed him, avoided his gaze but did not insult him again. The lines of the camp had begun to shift, even if only slightly. The captain still glared with hatred, but Marcus knew something had changed. The alien mother's plea had opened a wound in all of them. It had forced them to see what they tried so hard to bury, that mercy was not weakness, and cruelty was not strength. Marcus knew he had started something dangerous. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. But as he stood at his post, watching the horizon glow with the first light of morning, he tightened his grip on his rifle. If the hunters came, he would be ready. And if his own people turned against him, he would not bend. His choice had been made. One starving child had changed everything, and Marcus understood this truth clearly. The war they were fighting was no longer just with enemies outside, it was with the hearts inside their own walls. The camp was quiet, but Marcus could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had seen war before. He had lived through ambushes and raids, and there was always a certain tension in the air before danger struck. Now that same tension crept through his skin, making him restless. While most of the soldiers were laughing, eating, and pretending life was normal, Marcus kept scanning the dark desert beyond the outpost walls. It was there, in the endless sands, that he saw it, the faint glow of strange lights moving slowly across the horizon. At first, he thought it could be traders or travelers, but the movement was too sharp, too deliberate. He narrowed his eyes, his body tense. No caravan moved in formation like that. He had seen such lights before, long ago, during raids that left entire villages in ruins. These were not travelers. These were hunters. Marcus hurried to the command post and reported what he had seen. The officers listened with half-bored expressions. One of them shrugged. Could be heat shimmer. Could be nothing. Another leaned back in his chair. Even if they are slavers, what's it to us? We are not here to play saviors for every wandering alien. Marcus clenched his fists, anger flashing in his eyes. They're coming for her. You know it. And if they find her here, they won't just take her. They'll burn through us all to get what they want. But his words fell on deaf ears. The captain smirked, dismissing him with a wave. You should worry less about ghost lights and more about your own fate, soldier. You've already brought enough trouble. Marcus left the command tent with his jaw tight and his chest burning. He wanted to shout, to force them to see, but he knew it would change nothing. To them, he was already tainted, already disobedient. They would not listen. But deep down, Marcus trusted his instincts more than their empty authority. Something was coming, and it was coming fast. That night, he stood watch near the medical tent. The alien mother was awake, sitting on the edge of her cot with her child asleep in her lap. The dim lamp cast long shadows across her face, showing the hollows in her cheeks and the exhaustion in her eyes. When she noticed Marcus outside, she whispered something in her own tongue, then switched to broken human words. You saw them? She asked. Marcus nodded. Lights, he said. They're close. She closed her eyes, a shiver running through her thin frame. They never stop. Hunters, they follow always. Her fear was not only for herself. Marcus saw it in the way her arms wrapped tightly around her child, as if she believed at any moment he would be torn from her. Marcus leaned against the post, silent for a moment. Finally, he said quietly, They'll have to go through me first. The mother looked at him in disbelief. No human had ever spoken to her like that. To her people, humans were both a rumor and a warning, sometimes saviors, often conquerors. She studied Marcus's face as if searching for the truth in his words. At last, she whispered, Why? Marcus glanced at the sleeping child and then back at her. His answer was simple. because no child should live in fear like that. As the night dragged on, the air outside grew colder, and Marcus remained awake, pacing the perimeter. Each time he glanced out at the desert, the lights seemed closer, more distinct. His gut told him they were only hours away. Yet inside the camp, laughter still rang out. Some soldiers drank, others gambled. The command center ignored him. None of them wanted to believe danger was near. None wanted to admit the truth, that Marcus was right. He thought back to his earlier years as a soldier. He had seen men die because leaders ignored warnings. Pride had always been more dangerous than bullets. And now, here it was again, the pride of officers too arrogant to admit they could be wrong, even when the evidence was clear. In the early hours before dawn, Marcus saw movement near the walls. He raised his rifle, thinking for a moment that the enemy had already reached them. But then he saw it was only the alien child. Barefoot and shivering, the boy had wandered outside, drawn perhaps by nightmares. Marcus lowered his weapon and rushed to him. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, his tiny voice whispering in broken words, "They are coming." Marcus froze, staring down at him. The child's voice was shaky, but the certainty in it sent a chill through Marcus's bones. He lifted the boy gently in his arms and carried him back inside. The mother stirred as they entered, pulling the child to her chest. Marcus knelt beside them. "You're not safe here," he muttered, half to himself. "None of us are." He stayed by their side until the boy fell asleep again. Every sound outside made him tense. Every gust of wind across the sand made him grip his weapon tighter. His eyes never left the horizon, even through the tense, thin fabric walls. By the time the sun began to rise, he was certain. The lights were no illusion. The hunters were real. And they were close. He could almost feel their eyes watching the outpost, waiting for the moment to strike. When Marcus reported again at dawn, the captain laughed in his face. "You're paranoid," the man scoffed. "Your sympathy for that alien has clouded your judgment." But Marcus no longer cared what the captain thought. He had seen the signs, and he trusted the warning of the mother and her child. The slavers were coming. He could feel it in his bones. As the camp returned to its daily routine, Marcus tightened the straps on his armor and checked his rifle. If no one else would prepare, then he would. He looked toward the medical tent one last time and saw the woman watching him through the thin flap. Their eyes met in silence. She did not need to speak. Both of them knew the truth. The storm was coming, and soon the desert would run with fire. Before the sky even began to lighten, the silence of the desert broke with a low hum. It started faint, like the growl of distant thunder, but it grew until the sand itself seemed to tremble. Marcus was already awake, his rifle clutched in his hands, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When the first black shapes appeared in the distance, his breath caught in his chest. Ships, sleek, armored, and marked with the cruel insignia of the slavers. They descended fast, kicking up walls of dust as they surrounded the human outpost. The alarm rang out across the camp, soldiers stumbling from their bunks, scrambling to their stations. Shouts echoed, boots thundered, and weapons clicked into place. But Marcus could feel the fear in the air. These were not bandits. These were slavers, ruthless, disciplined, and merciless. They did not come to negotiate. They came to take what they wanted. A deep, metallic voice boomed from a loudspeaker on the lead ship. "Humans, you shelter what is ours. Surrender the alien woman and her spawn. Do this, and we will spare your camp. Refuse, and we will burn every stone to ash." The voice was cold, without a shred of mercy, each word striking like a hammer. All eyes turned toward the command tent. The officers gathered, their faces pale. The captain barked for silence, then addressed the slavers through the comm system. His voice shook despite his effort to sound firm. "We are not hiding anyone. Leave now or face consequences." But everyone in the camp knew it was a lie. The woman and child were there, and the slavers would not be fooled. The mother clutched her child inside the medical tent, her body shaking as the booming voice repeated its demand. Soldiers nearby whispered to each other. Some muttered that it was not worth dying for an alien. Others looked away, unwilling to face the truth. Fear spread like a disease, eating at discipline. Marcus saw it in their eyes. Many of them wanted to hand her over. The captain gathered his officers, his words sharp and urgent. "If we give them the alien, they'll leave. We'll survive. That is the logical choice." The officers nodded, some reluctantly, some eagerly. To them, it was simple. Sacrifice one life to save many. But Marcus felt rage rising inside him. He had seen this before, cowards trading lives to save their own skins, and he knew the truth the captain refused to admit. If they surrendered the woman, the slavers would still kill them. It was their way. Witnesses were never allowed to live. As the slavers' ships tightened their circle, the alien mother tried to stay hidden, but soldiers entered the medical tent. Their eyes avoided hers, their hands twitching near their weapons. One muttered, "Orders are orders." The child whimpered, clinging to his mother's chest. She whispered soft words to calm him, though her own tears fell silently. Marcus arrived just as the soldiers moved closer. His steps were heavy, his jaw set like stone. He positioned himself between them and the mother, his rifle raised. "She's under my protection," he said, his voice like steel. The soldiers froze, uncertainty flickering across their faces. They knew Marcus was serious. He would fire if they tried to take her. Outside, the slaver's voice roared again. "You have 1 minute. Surrender them now, or we take everything." The ground shook as the slavers charged their weapons, glowing with deadly energy. Panic swept through the camp. Soldiers shouted, officers argued, and the captain's voice cracked as he tried to maintain control. The mother's breath quickened. She pressed her child's face into her chest, whispering prayers in her broken voice. Marcus stood tall above them, his rifle steady, his eyes locked on the approaching shadows outside. Every heartbeat felt like a drumbeat of war. He could hear the fear around him, the desperation in every voice. Then, as the countdown began from the slaver ship, Marcus stepped forward into the open air. The dust whipped around him, the lights of the enemy ships glowing brighter. Dozens of eyes followed him, both human and alien. He raised his weapon, pointed it at the lead slaver, and shouted with every ounce of strength in his chest. "No!" The word cut through the noise like a blade. Soldiers gasped. The captain's face twisted in fury. The slavers paused for the briefest moment, surprised by his defiance. Marcus's voice thundered again. "You want them? You'll have to fight me, and you'll find out what it means to face a human who does not bow." Silence followed, thick and heavy, until the first shot rang out. Blaster fire streaked through the night, striking the walls, tearing holes into the outpost. Explosions rocked the ground, sparks flying as soldiers ducked for cover. Screams rose as the slavers unleashed their fury. Marcus dove into the chaos, firing back with precision. Each shot from his rifle struck true, dropping enemy raiders one by one. Around him, a handful of soldiers, inspired by his defiance, rallied. They formed a shield around the mother and child, returning fire with desperate courage. The battle roared like a storm. Sand and fire filled the air, smoke stung the eyes, and the metallic taste of fear mixed with the sound of gunfire. Marcus felt a searing pain as a bolt grazed his arm, burning through his armor, but he pressed on, teeth clenched, blood dripping. He would not stop. The slavers surged forward, their weapons cutting down anyone who faltered. But Marcus stood in their path, his rifle blazing, his body a wall of iron. Behind him, the mother clutched her child, her eyes wide with shock and awe. She had begged for scraps, and now this human fought an army for her. Through fire and smoke, Marcus's voice rose once more, raw and unbroken. "They are not yours. They never will be. You'll have to kill me first." And in that moment, something changed in the camp. Soldiers who had doubted, who had feared, found courage. One by one, they rose beside him, their rifles joining his. Together, they pushed back, not just against the slavers, but against the despair that had been choking them for too long. The first clash of battle ended with both sides wounded, but the message was clear. Marcus had chosen his path, and others had followed. The slavers had not taken the woman and child. The outpost still stood, battered but unbroken. The war for survival had begun, and Marcus had become its spark. Smoke rose above the outpost, and the cries of wounded soldiers mixed with the sharp echo of blaster fire. The ground shook with every strike from the slavers' heavy cannons. Marcus stood at the front, his chest heaving, his uniform torn and stained with blood. His arm burned from the wound he had taken, but his grip on the rifle never loosened. He could see the mother and her child behind him, crouched low, eyes wide with terror. They had nowhere to run. He had nowhere to retreat. If he moved aside, the enemy would seize them. He refused to let that happen. The slavers advanced, tall figures in dark armor, their glowing visors giving them an inhuman look. They moved in formation, firing in waves, pressing hard against the human defenses. The officers shouted orders, but their voices cracked with panic. Some soldiers broke ranks, scrambling for cover, their fear louder than duty. Yet there were others who looked at Marcus, at his unshaking stance, and found courage in it. Slowly, a small group gathered around him, their faces grim, their weapons ready. They formed a line beside him, shielding the mother and child with their own bodies. One young soldier, barely more than a boy, shouted over the noise, "We'll hold the line." His hands trembled, but he did not step back. Another soldier slammed a fresh magazine into her rifle, muttering, "If he can stand against them, so can we." Marcus gave them a short nod, his jaw clenched. He did not thank them, but his eyes carried the weight of respect. The slavers noticed the resistance, and their leader raised his blade high. "Fools!" he roared through his speaker. "You dare defy us for a worthless alien? We will crush you all!" His voice sent chills down the spines of many, but Marcus did not waver. He stepped forward, raising his rifle with steady hands, and fired directly into the chest of the slaver commander. The shot sparked against the thick armor, staggering the enemy leader but not felling him. The message, however, was clear. Marcus would not surrender, not even against impossible odds. The slavers charged. Explosions ripped through the outer wall, chunks of metal and stone flying in every direction. Soldiers screamed as they fell, but the small group around Marcus held their ground. They fired relentlessly, every shot aimed to protect the mother and child. Marcus felt a bolt sear across his shoulder, forcing him to his knees for a moment. The alien child cried out, trying to reach for him, but the mother held the boy back, tears streaming down her face. Marcus rose again, ignoring the pain. He shouted, his voice raw with fury, "Stand your ground! They will not take them!" His words carried through the chaos, louder than the blaster fire, stronger than the fear. Men and women who had thought of fleeing turned back. They lifted their weapons, joining the desperate defense. The line grew stronger, bound not by orders, but by a shared resolve. The slavers pressed harder, their weapons flashing in the smoke-filled night. Marcus moved like a storm, firing, reloading, throwing himself in front of every shot that threatened the mother and child. He was bleeding, exhausted, but unbreakable. One slaver broke through, leaping past the barricade, his blade raised high. Marcus spun and blocked him, their weapons clashing with sparks. The enemy was larger, stronger, armored, but Marcus fought with something more powerful: purpose. With a roar, he drove his knife into the gap under the slaver's arm, dropping him to the ground. The soldiers around him cheered, but it was short-lived. More enemies surged forward, their numbers overwhelming. Marcus looked back at the woman, his chest tightening. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she spoke without trembling. "Why?" she whispered. "Why fight for me?" Marcus's answer was simple, spoken even as he lifted his rifle again. "Because your life matters, because his life matters, and because if we give you up, we give up what makes us human." Her lips trembled, her tears falling harder, but she said nothing more. She pressed her forehead against her child's, whispering words of comfort, while Marcus and the others fought like wolves against the tide. The battle dragged on, seconds stretching into eternity. The slavers were relentless, their weapons cutting down defenders one by one. Marcus's vision blurred with blood and smoke, but every time his knees threatened to give out, he forced himself up again. Each movement was agony, but he could not fall. If he fell, the line would break and the child would be taken. That thought alone kept him standing. At last, the slavers faltered. Their commander barked new orders, and the enemy pulled back for a moment, regrouping. The camp fell into a tense silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of fires. Marcus dropped to one knee, gasping, his rifle nearly slipping from his hands. Around him, the small band of defenders stood bloodied but alive. They had survived the first wave. The mother crawled forward, her child still clutched in her arms. She reached out, touching Marcus's shoulder. Her voice shook as she said, "You saved us." Marcus shook his head, his face pale but his eyes steady. "Not yet. They'll come again, stronger." He forced himself back to his feet, towering over the defenders, his silhouette framed by the burning walls. He raised his rifle once more, his voice ringing out through the smoke and the fear. "We are the wall. If they want her, they have to break us first." The soldiers roared in answer, their fear replaced with fire. For the first time since the attack began, the outpost no longer felt like prey waiting to be devoured. It felt like warriors ready to fight. And at the center of it all stood Marcus, his body battered but his spirit unshaken, the human wall that no enemy could pass. The slavers were not gone, not defeated, but they had learned something in that clash. This camp was not as weak as they thought. And the human who stood at its heart was not just a soldier. He was a force they had never faced before. The outpost burned as the night dragged on. Fire spread across the broken walls, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the smoke. Marcus's body screamed with pain, every breath heavy, but he refused to fall. His arm was wrapped in blood-soaked cloth, his shoulder burned from another wound, yet he still carried his rifle, still stood tall before the mother and child. The soldiers around him were exhausted, their ammunition running low, but their eyes stayed fixed on him. He had become more than a soldier now. He was the reason they had not broken. When the slavers retreated after the first assault, many thought they might leave. But Marcus knew better. He had seen too many battles to be fooled. The hunters were regrouping, waiting for the moment to strike again. And when they returned, they would not come in small waves. They would come with full force. The outpost could not hold against it. If they stayed, everyone would die. He went to the hangar where old shuttles and transports were kept, most of them damaged and abandoned. The air smelled of fuel and burned metal. Marcus searched desperately, checking one machine after another until he found a shuttle that might still work. Its hull was cracked, one wing scarred from an old crash, but the engines looked intact. With repairs, it could fly. Barely. He turned to the soldiers who had fought beside him. This camp won't survive another attack. We need to get her and the child out. His voice was steady, though his face was pale with exhaustion. Some of them hesitated, torn between duty and survival. But a young recruit finally spoke. "If you're going, I'll go too." Another followed, then another. Not all agreed, but enough to make Marcus believe the plan could succeed. The alien mother was silent when Marcus told her. She held her child close, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. For days she had run, for days she had begged strangers for scraps. Now this human, wounded and hunted, spoke as if her survival was worth risking everything. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, so she only nodded. Marcus noticed her trembling hands, and he knelt beside her. "Listen to me," he said softly. "You and your boy will live. I'll see to it." She blinked back tears, whispering, Why do this?" Marcus's answer was simple, because no one else will. The night grew darker, the hum of slaver ships growing louder once more. The hunters were preparing for another strike. Time was slipping away. Marcus and a few soldiers worked frantically on the shuttle, pulling out broken wires, sealing leaks, and patching holes with whatever they could find. The engines coughed when he tested them, sputtering before finally roaring to life with a shaky growl. It wasn't much, but it was enough to run. Then, the attack began again. The slavers poured into the camp, their weapons cutting through defenses, their ships blasting apart what little remained of the walls. Soldiers screamed as the ground shook, and panic spread like wildfire. The captain shouted for order, but his men no longer trusted him. Many ran. Others dropped their weapons. The command was broken. Marcus grabbed the mother's hand, pulling her toward the shuttle. "Now!" he shouted. The small group of loyal soldiers covered them, firing desperately at the advancing raiders. The air filled with smoke, fire, and screams as they ran across the rubble-strewn camp. The alien child cried out, clinging to his mother's neck, his eyes wide with terror. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Marcus caught her, pushing her forward. "Keep moving." Blaster fire streaked past them, striking the ground at their feet. Marcus turned and fired back, hitting one slaver square in the chest, dropping him in the dust. His arm throbbed with pain, his vision swam, but he pressed on. Every second mattered. Every step brought them closer to survival, or to death. They reached the hangar as a group of slavers stormed in from the other side. Marcus pushed the mother and child into the shuttle, then spun to face the enemy. His rifle spat fire, covering the last soldiers as they climbed aboard. The slavers advanced, their weapons flashing, but Marcus stood in their path like a wall of iron. He fired until his rifle clicked empty, then pulled his knife, slashing at the nearest foe. Sparks flew as blades struck armor. "Go!" one soldier shouted, dragging Marcus backward toward the shuttle ramp. "We have to leave." Marcus's chest heaved, his face pale, but he shook his head. Not without them. He turned back once more, seeing the mother clutching her child inside the shuttle. The boy's wide eyes locked on his, silently begging him not to fall. That look gave him strength he did not know he had left. With a roar, he fought back harder, pushing the slavers just enough for the ramp to close. The shuttle's engines roared, shaking the hangar. The old machine trembled as if it might break apart, but the soldiers inside shouted encouragement, pulling every lever, slamming every switch. Marcus stumbled inside at the last second, collapsing against the wall. The mother reached for him, her hands bloody, but he waved her off. "Strap in," he muttered. The shuttle lurched upward, dust and fire swirling below as it lifted into the sky. Blaster bolts streaked past, some striking the hull, shaking it violently. The engines screamed, warning lights flashing red, but the craft stayed airborne. Marcus grabbed the controls, forcing the shuttle higher, his teeth clenched with effort. The slaver ships rose behind them, giving chase like wolves after prey. Inside, the mother held her child close, whispering prayers. The soldiers shouted warnings as enemy fire lit the sky around them. Marcus's hands gripped the controls so tightly his knuckles turned white. The shuttle shook, alarms blaring, but he pushed it forward with everything he had. "Hold on," he shouted. The desert below turned into a blur of fire and shadows. The slavers closed in, their ships faster, their weapons stronger. Every second the shuttle groaned, every hit threatened to tear it apart. Yet Marcus did not falter. Blood dripped from his wounds, his vision blurred, but his will burned brighter than the fire outside. He knew the truth. This was not just escape. This was defiance. By refusing to surrender, by protecting the helpless, he had declared war on the slavers in his own way. And as long as he lived, they would never take her. The mother's hand tightened around her child, her eyes locked on Marcus. For the first time, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt hope. He was only one man, wounded and hunted, but in that moment, he carried the weight of both their lives, and she believed he would not let go. The shuttle rattled violently as enemy fire chased it through the dark sky. Sparks leapt from the consoles, alarms blared, and the metal frame groaned as if it would split apart at any moment. Marcus gripped the controls with blood-stained hands, his jaw clenched, sweat dripping into his eyes. He could hear the engines straining, could feel every bolt in the shuttle shaking, but he kept it steady. Behind him, the mother held her child close, whispering words of comfort, even as her own voice trembled. The soldiers clung to their seats, some praying, others staring at Marcus, as if his strength alone could keep them alive. Outside, the slaver ships swarmed closer, their sleek hulls glowing with deadly energy. They fired in bursts, bolts streaking past the shuttle like falling stars. Each near hit made the shuttle jolt hard enough to throw everyone inside against the walls. One soldier cried out, his head bleeding from a sharp impact, but no one dared move from their seats. Marcus's eyes burned from exhaustion, his body screamed from pain, but his spirit refused to break. He knew that if they slowed even for a second, the hunters would rip them apart. The alien child peeked over his mother's arms, his wide eyes fixed on Marcus. The boy was too young to understand war, but he understood something else. The human at the controls was fighting for him, bleeding for him, carrying his life in his hands. The mother saw it too, and her heart twisted. She had begged strangers for scraps, been spat on, hunted, and left to die. But this man, this soldier, had chosen to fight an army for her. She pressed her forehead against her child's, whispering, "Hold on. He will save us." The enemy ships tightened their circle, closing in from every side. One of them loomed directly ahead, blocking their escape. Its cannons charged, glowing bright with deadly power. Marcus saw it and made his choice in an instant. His voice thundered through the shuttle. "Hold on." He slammed the controls forward, diving the shuttle straight toward the slaver command ship. Gasps and screams filled the cabin. The mother clutched her child tighter. Soldiers grabbed whatever they could, but Marcus's eyes never left the target. The slaver ship fired, a blast of searing energy tearing across the sky, but Marcus twisted the shuttle at the last moment, the beam missing by inches. The heat scorched the side of the hull, panels flying loose, but the shuttle kept moving. Faster, harder, closer, straight at the enemy's heart. The slavers inside their ship scrambled, firing wildly to stop the suicidal charge. But Marcus kept pushing, his blood dripping on the controls, his vision darkening at the edges. Inside the cabin, time seemed to slow. The roar of the engines drowned out the chaos. The glow of enemy fire lit their faces in flashes. The alien mother stared at Marcus, her lips moving without sound. She realized what he meant to do. He was going to sacrifice himself so that her child could live. Her tears fell silently, her arms tightening around her boy. The soldiers realized it too. Some shouted protests, others cursed, but none dared move to stop him. They knew he was right. It was the only way. At the last moment, Marcus activated the escape pods. With a single pull of the lever, the side hatches blew open, and the pods ejected into the dark sky. The mother screamed as the sudden force pulled her inside one, the child in her arms. Soldiers were thrown into the others, their bodies pressed against the walls as the pods shot away. She reached out desperately, her hand trembling toward Marcus, but the distance grew too fast. Her last sight of him was his bloodied face lit by fire, his hands steady on the controls, his eyes fierce with unbroken resolve. Then the shuttle struck the slaver command ship. The explosion tore through the sky like a second sun. Fire bloomed, swallowing metal and flesh alike. The shockwave rocked the escape pods, sending them tumbling through the air, but the safety systems held. The mother screamed, clutching her child as the pod spun, tears streaming down her face. Through the small window, she saw the burning wreckage of both ships falling into the desert below, fire lighting up the horizon. Silence followed. The pods drifted, floating gently downward, the stars above cold and endless. Inside, the survivors sat in shock, their breaths ragged, their hearts pounding. The mother pressed her child close, whispering his name over and over, as if speaking it could keep him safe. Her thoughts, though, were only of Marcus, the human who had given everything so that her boy might live. The pods landed roughly in the sand, bouncing before settling. Doors opened with hissing gas, and the survivors stumbled out into the cool desert night. The fires of the battle still glowed far away, but the slaver ships were gone. The command vessel was destroyed, and without it, the raiders had scattered, retreating into the endless dark. They had survived, but the man who saved them was gone. The alien mother fell to her knees in the sand, her child clinging to her neck. She wept openly, her voice breaking the silence. He gave his life for us. The soldiers stood around her, silent, their faces pale. They had seen many men die in war, but this was different. Marcus had not died for glory or for orders, but for compassion. For a mother who was not his own, for a child who shared no blood with him. Rumors would spread in the days to come. Survivors would tell the story of the human soldier who defied his own command, who stood against the hunters, who gave his life so that one alien child could eat, could breathe, could live. Some would call him a fool. Others would call him a traitor. But many, more than anyone expected, would call him a hero. The mother wiped her tears and looked down at her son, who was sleeping in her arms. She whispered softly, "Remember his name. Remember what he did, because one man's choice can change the galaxy." Her words drifted into the night, carried by the wind over the endless sands. And somewhere, in the broken desert where fire still smoldered, the memory of Marcus lived on, unyielding, eternal. A human who had shown the galaxy what true strength was.